is 4:30, so we will go ahead and call to order the Planning Commission agenda session. It is in preparation of Monday's June 13th Planning Commission meeting. My name is Jessie Masters. I'm the Development Review Manager here with the city, and we'll go ahead and go through the agenda. So we've got 2 items on the consent agenda. The first is the approval of the minutes from the May 23rd, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. The second item is CCP 2022-05. This is a concurrent plat submitted by Blue & Associates for property located at 4875 West Bittersweet Drive. The property is in the Fayetteville planning area and contains approximately 40.24 acres. The request is for the concurrent plat of 3 residential lots. So this one went through subdivision committee last week. The applicant is requesting to carve out essentially 2 small residential lots, about 1.5 acres to 2.5-ish acres in size, off of Indigo Drive and Canyon Run Drive. They have submitted a variance request in association with this to vary from the typical minimum lot width standards per Washington County requirements. We are recommending in favor of that variance request, finding that those lots still have adequate access off of those existing right-of-way, city right-of-way streets. So we were supportive of the request, and subdivision committee also was. We have not received any public comment on the item, and I think the subdivision committee recommended this one for consent agenda, so I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
I would be happy with consent if there be consistency.
Okay. We will leave that one on the consent agenda then. That brings us to our first item of unfinished business. This is VAR 2022-016. This is a variance submitted by the Atwell Group for property located at 1605 West Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. The property is zoned I-1 heavy commercial and light industrial and contains approximately 0.86 acres. The request is for variance to curb cut separation, right-of-way dedication, and sidewalk construction. The item, you recall, was tabled at the previous meeting on May 23rd. Yesterday, we heard from the applicant that they have requested to table themselves until the June 27th meeting. So that is staff's recommendation at that time. We did not get anything updated from the applicant, so we are recommending that the item be tabled until June 27th. Are there any questions about this item at that time? So there isn't really a staff report on this item since the applicant would like to be heard at the next meeting. Okay, hearing none. We will move on then to first item of new business is VAR 2022-015. This is a variance submitted by Modus Studio for property located at 1 West Mountain Street, Unit 100. The property is zoned NSC, Main Street Center, and contains approximately 0.12 acres. The request is for a variance from downtown design standards. So the request before you today is about a balcony that was constructed on this property. The applicant constructed a balcony. They did receive a building permit for that, but they built the balcony differently than what was permitted. So the balcony is currently not meeting 2 of the design standards as outlined by the Downtown Design Overlay District. The first requirement there is that balconies are required a maximum length of 80% of a building's facade. The current balcony is about 93% of the building's facade. The second requirement is that balconies are required to have an underside that is covered. Right now the applicant is showing that they have, or not showing, but they have a grate for their flooring basically on the balcony. So staff is actually recommending in favor of the first variance. Obviously we don't really love being in a situation where we're bringing variances forward for errors that were made in the field, but in this particular instance, we do think that a request to the variance to that 80% standard doesn't really, or it's in line with the overall intent of the ordinance. So generally speaking, you know, having a balcony take over the entire length of a building's facade, we think kind of the intent of that ordinance is to allow, you know, for areas for light and air to pass through from above, and also so that the balcony doesn't really become overbearing to the public realm. Secondly, in this particular instance, the balcony is kind of operating as a canopy or an entryway to the building, so we don't really find that approving the variance to that 80% standard in this instance really undermines the requirement. We think that in this instance the balcony is kind of serving kind of a different purpose. The second requirement, however, with the requiring that flooring to be a covered material, we are not in favor of. It has, from our perspective, it has less to do with an aesthetic value and more with actually a safety concern. With the grate, we would have concerns that maybe there could be spilled liquids or litter or trash that would come down into the pedestrian sidewalk through that grate. And there's also a potential, sounds kind of crass to talk about it this way, but there's potential, I think, if people were wearing like dresses or skirts, that you would have an issue with pedestrians walking underneath. So we're not supporting the variance request of that second item, but we are supporting the first one. So that was a lot of chat, but if you have any questions about that, let me know. We have not received any public comment.
Couple of questions. Can the material that is the roof or whatever, can it be transparent?
I think the language in the code, it says it has to be solid, but I'd have to double check the exact wording of it.
Yeah, just because that could
Because solid would not be the same thing as opaque.
Yeah,
Right.
I think the intention is that it is
or translucent.
not transparent.
Transparent.
But let me double check the ordinance language on that.
And then the thing that I thought we were going to be talking about with this was the way that the stairway covers up the mural, but that is not an issue.
That is not governed by the Downtown Design Overlay District.
And was the stair approved to cover up the?
Yes, the
mural?
stair
Okay.
was approved as submitted. Yep,
Very good. Just
built
unhappy.
as approved. Yeah.
Private property.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the 80% rule is anywhere on the facade. It's not that it has to be back from the corner. Is that right? It's just that it's 80%?
Correct. It's a length requirement.
Just to pull up for this meeting.
I've been trying to. and
I thought it was going to be that they made the entire whole ground floor glass.
I'm just wondering, it might not be posted.
That we
'Cause
haven't looked
City council's
at
updated.
Exactly.
for this particular CFO. That wasn't something that I think there is actually two separate building permits. So that this one is for the suite above that included the balcony.
Because I was just surprised when it suddenly became completely glass. And then we were watching, because we walked by there and noticed as it changes and how slowly it's going.
So was it an error in the part of the city?
No.
I have to voice this because I think in consistency, Christ Community Church had a downtown variance which we denied probably less than a year ago. And I think it's unfair to say, okay, on the very corner of that square, no, and then here on the other part that's interior to say, oh yeah, that's okay. And I think we need to make a statement at some point, if it's your error, we can't sit here. There's another instance down on Greg Street where they had to have a face fronting the street.
The door to the street thing?
And that was actually, I had a little more compassion there because they were doing 3 or 4 different buildings and they just forgot on that one end, and it really did not detract from the overall aesthetic. And here I feel like, where do our downtown standards come in? If it's okay to say no, this is not something, but we can talk about that.
Yeah.
Sorry to get on a bandwagon, but right there as I see community church, that just rings that bell of that denial that we gave to them.
So
You had some more questions.
to follow up on Commissioner Winston's question, the language in the code states that the underside of a balcony extending over a sidewalk shall be covered with a solid material, and lighting may be required depending on the proximity to a streetlight. There is a streetlight on that corner, so lighting wasn't going to be a requirement there.
And solid does not mean transparent.
Solid would not mean transparent.
And then just one other thing is, my pad's not updating for today's meeting. Is it posted?
It should have been.
Posted.
Yeah, it should have been.
I have the same issue.
Is this something
Okay.
other?
We can.
My issue was that my battery was dead, which I didn't realize.
Mine's dead, yeah. They don't last.
I will shoot a message to the folks that take care of that to see if there's something a button they can push on their end.
Your iPads, did they just update today or?
Yeah, well, the city council
Last night.
agenda session and meeting updated just now, so I think that's why I think it's not with the pad.
I'm connected to.
And I'm Wi-Fi connected to the right one, I think.
I will let our development coordinator know.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that was one of those issues where where do we hold the line on variances from the one 4 weeks ago? And then the one a year ago where they had to change the frontal design. It's, you know, if it complies with the intent.
Wasn't the number, the area of windows on that one?
It was glass on the block side.
And there was like a stairwell issue
Yeah,
or something
yeah,
like that
exactly.
that was, yeah.
All right, well, if there are any other questions on that one, all right, with that, I think we'll move on then to our next item is LSD 2022-09. This is a large-scale development submitted by ESI for property located at 2364 South Armstrong Avenue. The property is zoned I-2 General Industrial and contains approximately 24.3 acres. The request is for a 48,000 square foot expansion of existing facility. This is another existing Marshalltown property that's looking to expand. So we had one a few months ago that you may recall. So in this instance, they are looking to expand their facility by about 48,000 square feet and add some additional parking and some additional kind of truck maneuvering area on the site. Staff is recommending in favor of the request. Some pieces of nuance for you have to do with the street improvements. So they've requested a variance to, so both East Pump Station Road and South Armstrong Avenue are called out as neighborhood link streets. So would typically require 8-foot sidewalks and associated green space. Staff is actually recommending that, so they've requested a variance to that standard. They installed sidewalk along East Pump Station Road to the Master Street Plan standards at that time, in about 2017. So we are recommending that that sidewalk can stay as is. And then on South Armstrong Avenue, they've requested a variance there as well. The sidewalk there was installed in 2015. Staff is actually recommending, in this instance, that a roughly proportional impact here, or development associated with this would be to do a fee in lieu for the portion of South Armstrong that's being affected by the addition. So it's essentially about a 500 linear foot distance on the northern portion of South Armstrong Avenue. So we are requesting a fee in lieu for basically a 500 linear distance, an additional 3 feet of sidewalk, since there's an existing 5-foot sidewalk there, at that typical fee in lieu rate of $5 per square foot. So it comes out to be about $7,500. That's staff's recommendation, ultimately Planning Commission's determination. So they are requesting a variance to build no sidewalk, or to do nothing there along that frontage.
No fee in lieu, right?
Correct, yep. So that's staff's recommendation. That's something for the Planning Commission to think about on
And you
Monday.
said it's a neighborhood link street?
It's a neighborhood link street, and there is a trail to the south, the St. Paul Trail. So that's where staff is landing on that.
If the sidewalk were built, would it hook up to the trail?
The sidewalk currently, I think, is the entire frontage of South Armstrong, and I think it does link up to that trail to the south, but it's not currently built to what the city would want to see there ultimately, since the neighborhood link street requires 8-foot sidewalk and they have a 5-foot sidewalk. We have not received any public comment on the item, and again, recommending in favor. They don't have any design requirements or anything they need to meet because of their use. So with that, I can take any questions.
But an 8-foot sidewalk also doesn't meet the standards for a multi-use trail. It's just a,
Correct. Correct. Yep.
But it's not intended to be a multi-use trail, it's just that it hooks up to one, right?
Correct. Yes. Any other questions? Okay. Our next item is LSD 2022-014. This is a large-scale development submitted by Community by Design for properties located at 3220 West Old Farmington Road. The property is zoned NC, Neighborhood Conservation, and contains approximately 20.4 acres. The request is for the development of 3 cluster housing developments containing 28 residences, and Ryan Umberger is the planner on this one.
Thank you. This property is in southwest Fayetteville. It's one that you all are likely familiar with at this point. We've had quite a few development applications come through on this recently. Two rezoning requests and a conditional use permit have come through. Most recently, at the April 19th, 2022 City Council meeting, the property was rezoned from RSF 8 to its current neighborhood conservation designation. And there is an approved conditional use permit for the development of cluster housing development at this location. This property does slope down from Centennial Park. It levels out from those two agricultural ponds that you see towards to the south towards Old Farmington Road. There's steep terrain as you get further north, and there's some areas that are designated in the Hilltop Overlay District. And there is a protected stream on site that runs along parallel to that west property line where you can kind of see the hillshade there. The applicant is requesting large-scale development approval to develop the subject property with 3 cluster housing developments that would be composed of 28 residential units. And they are requesting a variance, a planning commission variance along with that request. The planning commission variance is they're requesting a planning commission variance, and then there is also an issue with street improvements that I'll get into right afterwards. So the variance is to the effective curb radius required for a residential link street, and staff is supportive of that variance request. I think the remaining question that we have from a staff perspective on this is in terms of street improvements and specifically the internal streets. So the applicant is proposing public streets throughout the interior of this development. Staff is recommending that the internal streets are improved as they were conditioned with the conditional use permit. And the applicant is proposing reducing the dedicated right-of-way and sidewalk width by 1/2 foot. So the right-of-way would go from 34.5 feet to 34 feet, and the sidewalk width would go from 6.5 feet to 6 feet. This question about the internal street improvements has some bearing on staff's recommendation. We are recommending that this item be tabled to the next planning commission meeting. Part of the reasoning for that is because there is an administrative item that's been submitted to amend the conditional use permit since those street improvements were conditioned at that stage. So basically, from a staff perspective, we're trying to align the processes. There's a question of the zoning entitlements where their street improvements are tied to because we have a condition of approval that requires that 34.5 feet. And then there's the development entitlements, which is this large-scale development application where they're proposing to reduce that by 6 inches, basically. So staff is maintaining that the right-of-way should be 34.5 feet with 6.5 foot sidewalks. That's an additional 6 inches for shy distance where sidewalks are on the backside of a curb. And the applicant is basically proposing to reduce that from 6.5 feet to 6 feet. So again, from a staff perspective, we are recommending that this be tabled just so that those two applications can be determined at the same time. It's ultimately up to the planning commission's discretion as to whether or not you'd want to go ahead and make a determination on street improvements and see an item, basically a redundant item in 2 weeks where we would want to probably some consistency in that decision making. We have received some public comment on this from a neighbor. They did not comment in favor or opposition of the development. They expressed a desire to have open ditches along Old Farmington improved so that they can adequately handle stormwater runoff. And a neighbor, it wasn't clear if this was the same neighbor or not because the caller we didn't get a name for, but a neighbor did attend the subdivision committee meeting on June 2nd. And they suggested that the stormwater runoff had been aggravated in recent years because of development in the area. They spoke to inadequate street infrastructure along Old Farmington Road. They did support improvements, recommended improvements to the intersection of 1 Mile Road in Old Farmington. And they mentioned that some conversations with the applicant did relieve some concerns that they had about screening between their residence, which was immediately south of this development, and the development itself. So again, we are recommending that this one be tabled to the next meeting, and I can take any questions that you have.
So we've never done this probably because it's illegal. Can you put a tabling on consent?
No.
Okay.
I think it makes sense to see the whole thing, and I'd be wanting to table it and see the conditional use permit altogether. I think that makes a
So
lot of
I'm
sense.
fine with tabling it, but I don't want to put it on consent even if we could, just because there's probably going to be some public comments since there was at subdivision. We do want to keep that open up to them.
I'm just trying to understand why we're seeing this again, because I feel like was that the conditional use that we
Sure.
saw it?
Yes.
And so now because I thought it was all like final site plan, and for it to come back again, it's like,
Yeah, so what you've seen previously is the full development plan with that conditional use permit
Right.
request. This is, I believe I think there were 15 total cluster housing developments with that conditional use permit. That's the zoning entitlements.
so this is just looking at 3 of them.
This is looking at 3 of those 15, and this is the actual development entitlements for those 3.
This is a comment for Britt in the future. I think we need to clean up what is a cluster housing development versus a cottage court, because this is like Fayetteville's way that we use this seems to be different than anywhere else that we would have all these cluster housing. I know that's not the top on today's table, but big picture, it's a little bit,
From my perspective, this whole cluster housing thing is pretty new. We haven't seen too many of them until recently.
I have to agree with Commissioner Madden about, why don't we see this as a whole instead of letting these cottage housing kind of piecemeal through. I think it's better to see a development as it's planned. I think the more we can see up front, the better the development will be. And
well, in other places, I know this is for long range, but I'm just kidding. In other places where I've dealt with, cluster housing is an environmental thing, and it's a way, basically you have the whole entitlement for a big parcel, and you cluster it into much smaller lots in a certain area in order to preserve a big chunk of it. That's the way I've seen it. But here, it's clearly used differently, and it seems more like what other places call cottage courts, except usually a cottage court has a limited number, and here we say, oh, you can have 10 cottage courts all right together, and what it ends up being is a lot of houses really close together, really small anyway. So it's just, our terminology is different than other places, and I'm still trying to understand what our intent was with the original language anyway. Doesn't apply to this now, but it would.
if the other commissioners would be happy, I'd be happy to table this.
Yeah, I'm fine with tabling it.
Is the applicant aware of our suggestion to table?
Yes, we spoke with the applicant this afternoon.
And I'm assuming they're
We
good
can't
with
table
that as
it
well.
here.
No, you'll have to vote on the tabling
Good.
on
Yeah.
Monday. Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
Okay.
That was kind of.
Can I move to bring the tabled item up to the top of the new business, just because if it's gonna be tabled anyway, that should be shorter, and again, we probably will have some public comments, so I'd hate for people to leave. I would have to be there for something that's not gonna be voted on, if that makes sense.
Sure. I will, we can move this to the first item of new business.
That's okay with everyone else.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good plan.
Can do. All right. Any other questions about that staff can help answer ahead of Monday's discussion? All right. Moving along, we have LSD 2022-015. This is a large-scale development submitted by ESI for property located at 5102 West Weddington Drive. Property is zoned NSG, Neighborhood Services General, and contains approximately 1.46 acres. The request is for 2 7,800 square foot commercial buildings and associated parking. I did want to say that I got word that Granicus should be updated, so you should be able to see it on your iPads. Okay, great. Just wanted to get confirmation on that. So this is a large-scale development. 2 7,800 square foot commercial buildings are being built along Weddington Drive. The area was platted with a subdivision, or the lot was platted with a subdivision that's coming into the south within the past year or so. It's in the process of getting final plat now. They are requesting 2 commercial buildings that are in accordance with use unit 12B, which is allowed by right in the Neighborhood Services General District. There are some heightened design standards which were not quite sorted out at the time of subdivision committee. The applicant did submit updated elevations that do appear to be meeting our design requirements at this time, so they're not seeking any variances for this project. We have not received any public comment on it, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Can we put this on consent since there's no variances?
We certainly can.
That
That's
sounds
what I would
great.
be in favor
Let's do
of.
that.
Any other thoughts on that?
Nope.
Okay. Next up, we do have an item that was withdrawn at the request of the applicant. This is CUP 2022-013. It's a conditional use permit submitted by Craft and Tall for property located at 3162 West Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. Property is zone C1 neighborhood commercial and contains approximately 0.70 acres. The request is for use unit 16 shopping goods in C1 zoning. We have it on the agenda because the applicant had done public notification on it, but it is not going to be heard because the applicant has withdrawn the request. So we will just go ahead and skip over that one and go to CUP 2022-014. This is a conditional use permit.
Jesse,
Yeah.
Jesse, I'm sorry. Is that still going to be on the agenda for next week?
It'll be listed on the agenda, but you won't talk about it because the applicant.
Oh, okay, can we move that up too, just in case anyone wanted to have a comment on that?
Sure, yeah.
Okay,
sure.
Thank you.
We'll move that to the second item, or do you want to move it? Do you want this one to be the first item?
If we could do first, since we're not gonna discuss it anyway, we
Yep.
can get that out of the way, if that's all right with everyone else.
I am fine with that. Okay. Next up, we have CUP 2022-014. This is a conditional use permit submitted by Matthew Boykin for property located at 2751 East Meandering Way. The property is zoned RSF4 residential single family 4 units per acre and contains approximately 0.31 acres. The request is for use unit 24 home occupation and RSF4 zoning, and Ryan Umberger is the planner on this one.
Yeah, thank you. This property is in East Fayetteville. It's roughly 150 feet west of the intersection of Meandering Way and North Crossover Road. Maybe a more prominent intersection is to the north here, the intersection of Mission and Crossover. The property totals 0.31 acres and is zoned RSF4 residential single family 4 units per acre. There's currently a roughly 2,100 square foot single family home that occupies the site. The applicant is requesting a conditional use permit for their residents for internet-based firearm sales. Home-based firearms businesses are classified as use unit 24 home occupations, which is allowed by conditional use in RSF4 zoning. So the reason that firearm sales are classified under use unit 24 is because they are inherently traffic generating, as we've been advised by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. In order to have a federal license, a dealer in firearms is required to engage in business at the address listed on, at the location listed on their license. So you will see a little bit of a discrepancy in the way that the request letter is written as far as their anticipated number of customers and what staff is recommending. Basically, in short, we are recommending that they anticipate 0 customers per day visiting the site. We're recommending that they're allowed up to 1 customer per day, 5 days a week to visit the property. And basically, the idea there is that they could potentially be having visits from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives themselves come by, or and just some general ambiguity about the exact way that the firearms would be sold. If it is purely just online, then they may truly have zero customers coming and visiting the site. So we just added that condition to give them a little bit of flexibility. Staff is recommending approval of the conditional use permit subject to a few conditions. One of those conditions is that the business owner is required to comply with any and all state and federal regulations as they pertain to firearm sales. And we have not received any public comment on this request, and I can stand for any questions that you might have.
So they're not asking for any signage or anything like that, and there don't have to be any accommodations for any kind of like delivery trucks or anything like that?
Any further questions on that? Okay. Next item is RZN 2022-022. This is a rezone submitted by Daniel Bearden for property located at 3061 East Skillern Road. The property is zoned RA, residential agricultural, and contains approximately 2.99 acres. The request is to rezone the property to RSF4, residential single-family, 4 units per acre, and the planner is Ryan Umberger on this one.
This property is also in East Fayetteville. It's roughly 1/10 of a mile east of the intersection of Old Wire and Crossover, and actually Skillern is where Old Wire intersects with Crossover, and then it turns into Skillern Road. This property is zoned RA, residential agricultural, and it contains approximately 2.99 acres. Roughly 1,897 square foot residence occupies the property. There's tree canopy that covers most of the property, especially towards the south where the existing residence is not there. And there is a roughly 6% grade that slopes pretty consistently from the east property line down towards the west property line. The property does not lie within the Hillside Hilltop Overlay District, and there's not floodplain present on this property. The request is to rezone the property from RA, residential agricultural, to RSF4, residential single family, 4 units per acre. Staff has received a pretty significant number of inquiries, questions, and comments on this rezoning request. A lot of the comments have involved drainage and stormwater concerns, and then also just the number of lots that this could potentially be subdivided into. There's some written comments that are attached to your staff reports. Staff is recommending that this item be forwarded with the recommendation of approval to City Council, and I can stand for any questions that you have.
I have a question. So this is approximately 2.99 acres. That 1/100th of an acre that it's under 3 acres, would that actually remove the ability of one housing unit to be built on it?
So,
And if it was 3 acres?
that's sort of a complicated question, because if they were to be able, so I think what you're speaking to is basically their density allowance
Yeah, I guess so.
versus the actual like
Buildable area.
realistic like subdivision potential of it. If they were to maximize the number of units that they could place on this property, they would have to build a public street, and so that would pretty significantly cut into the amount of developable area of the site. So I don't have a great question as far as, or a great answer as far as if they were to build out that public street, what that would look like, but I can speak to the existing condition with Skillern. They've got roughly 200 feet of frontage onto Skillern. Under RSF4 zoning, they would be, as it's currently constructed, they would be able to subdivide the property to create 2 conforming lots onto Skillern. RSF4 has a lot width requirement of 80 feet. And so, you know, with the existing street and with that zoning, they would potentially be able to create 2 conforming lots fronting onto Skillern, and they could create 2 tandem lots with that change to the ordinance that just recently came through.
I have a follow-up question to Commissioner Winston's. Could they go to cluster housing if approved as RSF4?
as a conditional use permit.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions on that? Okay, next up we have RZN 22-023. This is our last item, is rezone submitted by Party Investments for property located at 1140 North College Avenue. The property is zoned CS, Community Services. It contains approximately 0.6 acres. The request is to rezone the property to UT Urban Thoroughfare, and Gretchen Harrison is the planner on this one.
So the property for this rezoning is the site of the former Highway Inn Motel, which is located on the east side of College Avenue between North and Sycamore Street. The property was previously rezoned from C2 to CS, Community Services, in 2019, and that was primarily to allow residential uses on the site so that the Fayetteville Housing Authority could use it for veteran housing. They have since sold the property, and the buyers are looking to have kind of a mixed-use adaptively reused new development there, which will include a motel hotel component, and that is not allowed by right in CS. So they're looking to rezone it to UT Urban Thoroughfare so that they can have that use allowed by right, which is also the historic use of the site. Staff is supporting the rezoning to UT, finding it to be compatible. It's on College Avenue, which is a major thoroughfare, and our long-range group is looking to rezone a lot of properties around this area in the near future, also to UT, so it's compatible with kind of our future plans for the area and what you discussed at your long-range meeting a few weeks ago. So we are supporting this request. We did not receive any public comment on the item, but I could stand for any questions that you may have on it.
So I'm trying to remember which one of these motels is the Highway Inn. Does this one have a restaurant in the middle or no?
Yeah, the Cafe Rue Orleans.
Okay, that's right. That's the one I thought it was. I was just wanting to make sure.
And they're looking at redevelopment, right?
Presumably,
To some
yeah.
extent.
Well, that was my second question. Is their plan to actually redevelop, or are they just gonna renovate what's there?
I don't think staff has seen a redevelopment plan yet.
Maybe paint.
Hey, I had their food at the thing in the garden where I saw Blake.
Good.
Well,
That's the first time I had it, so.
Good, we know where you're talking about.
does anyone have any further questions at this time on that item? All right, well, hearing none, that is our agenda. We'll make those changes per your request, and I don't believe there's long range tonight, so with that, we will go ahead and adjourn. Thank you all very much for your time.